Ever seen a reporter turn into a giant turtle, a human porcupine, or a wish-granting genie? In this video, I dig into the strangest transformations of Jimmy Olsen, Superman's most metamorphic sidekick, and uncover what these bizarre Silver Age stories really say about identity, power, and Cold War America. It's campy, it's clever, and it's weirdly poignant. Get ready for Elastic Lad, Super Brain Jimmy, and the kaiju nobody asked for. Stay tuned for the video.
Anachronic.
Hi comic book fans, I'm Joe and welcome to Anachronic Comics. Before he was a meme-worthy Wolfman or the proud owner of porcupine quilts, Jimmy Olsen started out as a necessity. He was first introduced in the early 1940s Superman radio serial, added only because radio scripts needed someone to talk to Superman. Simple as that. But Jimmy had staying power. When he made the leap to comics, his role expanded. He wasn't just Superman's pal, he became our pal, a stand-in for the young readers who wanted to be right there in the action. Olsen was plucky, fallible, curious, a perfect point of entry for kids imagining themselves in the DC universe. That clever bit of reader identification took root, and in 1954, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen was given his own series, kicking off a 20-year run filled with journalism, hijinks, and increasingly, transformations. At first, the stories were fairly grounded. Jimmy chasing scoops, getting into trouble, and proving his worth. By the late 1950s, whimsy had taken over. By 1957, the seeds were planted. And by the end of 1958, the series fully embraced the surreal and never looked back. Nearly every issue featured a new, often bizarre transformation. Jimmy as a werewolf, a giant turtle, an alien, a genie, or Elastic Lad. The causes? Often something Superman brought back from deep space, or the latest ill-advised experiment from Professor Potter. To a casual reader, these might look like throwaway gags, but dig deeper and you'll find they're gold mines, not just of entertainment, but of cultural subtext. Behind the scenes, a formula clicked. Editor Mort Weisinger encouraged the creative team to go weirder, wilder, and stranger. The more outlandish the transformation, the better. And so we got Bizarro Jimmy, Turtle Man Jimmy, Chameleon Head Jimmy, even the tragically overlooked Human Octopus Jimmy. The earliest examples are written by Otto Binder, who'd spent years plotting the whimsical exploits of Captain Marvel. Even Superman co-creator Jerry Siegel got involved writing some of these stories. But it's important to note that these weren't just stories for laughs. They were visual metaphors, parables of power, identity, and anxiety, all under the safety blanket of Silver Age silliness. In all, I found 42 different Jimmy Olsen transformations. There might be more. Here are 10 of my favorites in reverse chronological order. The Super Brain of Jimmy Olsen from Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen number 22, August 1957, written by Otto Binder and drawn by Curt Swan. Jimmy gains a massive cranium and superintelligence after exposure to a mysterious machine. He becomes a cold, calculating genius, and apparently a real pain for Superman. This story plays on Cold War-era fears of unchecked scientific advancement. Jimmy's transformation into a hyper-intelligent but emotionally detached figure mirrors the era's suspicion of intellect divorced from humanity. In the atomic age, intelligence was both revered and feared. Jimmy's cold, calculating super-intellect echoes anxieties about scientists creating weapons of mass destruction or machines outthinking humans. Does it remind you of today's concerns with artificial intelligence, anyone? Yeah, Jimmy is AI in a bow tie. Next, The Human Skyscraper, from issue number 28, April 1958, written by Otto Binder and drawn by Curt Swan. After a freak accident, Jimmy grows into towering proportions. Cue the King Kong homages and a very stressed-out Metropolis. Giant Jimmy represents the classic power without control trope. His size makes him a danger to society, echoing the 1950s monster movie themes, where science creates giants that threaten civilization. Think Attack of the 50-Foot Woman meets King Kong. The story literalized the fear of individuals being dwarfed or overwhelmed by modern society. Next, Elastic Lad from issue number 31, September 1958, again written by Otto Binder and drawn by Kurt Swan. This is one of Jimmy's most enduring transformations. After spilling an experimental serum on himself, he gains stretching powers, and in later adventures even joins the Legion of Superheroes. This one's a rare empowerment arc. Jimmy becomes a legitimate superhero in a decade obsessed with conformity. Jimmy's elastic powers reflect the wish fulfillment fantasy of every man becoming extraordinary, the ability to stretch beyond societal roles. It's a subtle nod to the desire for personal agency in a rigid world and to readers who saw themselves in Jimmy. Next, Jimmy Olsen from Jupiter, issue number 32, October 1958, again, a Binder-Swan collaboration. Jimmy is transformed into a Jovian with a bulbous head and alien physiology. It's weird, it's wild, and it's peak Silver Age. Alien transformations were a staple of the time, reflecting both fascination and fear of the unknown. Jimmy's alien form underscores themes of identity and otherness. How much of you remains when your body is no longer your own? Becoming an alien taps into fears of infiltration and the loss of self. Back in 1958, it was also a metaphor for the Red Scare, where anyone could be the other, even your friendly neighborhood reporter. Next, The Human Flamethrower, issue number 33 from December 1958, Binder and Swan. Jimmy's body becomes a living furnace. He can breathe fire, but he can't control it. This transformation taps into the fear of losing control over one's own body. It's a metaphor for rage, puberty, and even the era's uneased with nuclear energy. All volatile forces that can destroy, if not contained. Next, The Human Octopus, issue number 41, December 1959, written by Robert Bernstein and drawn by Kurt Swan. Returning from a mission in space, Superman has an armload of souvenirs for Jimmy to write articles about in the Daily Planet. While he's examining them, he accidentally bites into a strange alien fruit. When telling Superman about the incident, Superman informs Jimmy that the space fruit comes from a world populated with aliens that have 6 arms. You guessed it, Jimmy sprouts extra arms. This story leans into body horror and grotesque showing how physical mutations can isolate and alienate. This transformation reflects fears of mutation and contamination common in the post-Hiroshima world. It also plays with the idea of losing one's humanity, a theme that resonated in an age of conformity and repression. It's also a visual playground for artists. Kurt Swan had a field day. Next, Jimmy the Genie, issue number 42, January 1960, again Bernstein and Swan. After rubbing a magic lamp, Jimmy ends up trading places with the genie and becomes a wish-granting genie himself. A commentary on wish fulfillment gone wrong. Jimmy gains magical abilities but becomes a servant. It's a cautionary tale. You can have everything you want, but you're still not free. Next, The Wolfman of Metropolis, issue number 44 from April 1960, Binder and Swan. Jimmy is cursed and becomes a werewolf. The only cure? A kiss from Miss X, who turns out to be Supergirl in disguise. Classic horror meets romantic comedy. The werewolf trope speaks to the fear of losing control, especially over one's primitive instincts, but here it's softened by the kiss-to-cure twist. In a culture that prized stoicism, this story lets readers explore emotional and physical transformation safely. Next, The Giant Turtle Man, issue 53 from June 1961, Jerry Siegel and Kurt Swan. Jimmy mutates into a colossal turtle creature and rampages through Metropolis. Arguably, the most iconic transformation, this one is pure kaiju homage. It's about the fear of becoming a monster and the tragedy of being misunderstood. Jimmy's mutation into a kaiju-like creature echoes Japan's Godzilla and America's own fears about nuclear fallout. And finally, The Human Porcupine from issue number 65, December 1962, again by Jerry Siegel and drawn by Kurt Swan. This one's surprisingly tender. It's bizarre, uncomfortable, and somehow still charming. Jimmy's spiker form after rejecting Mr. McSiplick's ex, Miss Gipslick, I don't know, Miss G, becomes a metaphor for how we may lash out after emotional wounds and the pain of unwanted affection. A very human response wrapped in Silver Age absurdity. It's absurd, yes, but it's also oddly poignant. So many of us today dismiss the Superman's Pal Jimmy Olsen run as non-consequential. However, it was a bestseller throughout the 1960s. At its peak, it was the #4 best-selling comic book with an estimated 520,000 copies sold each month in 1961, outselling Batman and Action Comics. Reprints from the magazine were featured in 80-Page Giants number 2 and 3, which I happen to have bought as a kid. And there are two comics. Oops. There are two comics my mom let me keep. Jimmy Olsen wasn't just Superman's pal. He was the Silver Age guinea pig for every sci-fi trope imaginable. Mort Weisinger's editorial formula thrived on familiarity with a twist. Readers knew Jimmy would transform, but how and why changed each time. This created a rhythm that was comforting yet surprising. A serialized structure that encouraged collection and anticipation. Jimmy was the audience surrogate, a normal guy thrust into extraordinary situations. His transformations let readers vicariously explore identity, power, and alienation without the burden of reality. Sometimes he even saved the day, flipping the sidekick dynamic. These transformations weren't just gags. They were a playground for artists and writers to push the boundaries of identity, absurdity, and comic book physics. Which one's your favorite? Let me know in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and check out the other comics my mom let me keep back in the 1960s in these videos. Be well, and I'll see you soon.